The boss monster, the win condition. It's what you want to work towards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Whether they deliver devastating attacks, have game-changing effects, or completely control the field, when you start playing, your mission is to bring these guys out and quick. And then there are the ones that, just kinda suck. Yeah, not all boss monsters are created equally. And for every Boarload Savage Dragon or Access Code Talker, there are gonna be a couple of Gate Guardians or Fail Whales. And it's easy to pick on boss monsters like those, but sometimes it's easy to forget that weak boss monsters sometimes make their way into good archetypes. Decks that are otherwise really impressive, but have one straggler in there just stinking up the joint. So for this video, I wanted to catalog some of the worst boss monsters in decks that are otherwise really good. So let's begin. Check this out, I'm about to get myself canceled. I think Flu is not that annoying. Yeah, I know everyone has a vendetta against Flu, but here's the thing, they do have a lot of weaknesses. They're prone to breaking and their reliance on searching is honestly simple to counter, so I don't find them that bad. That said, they're nothing to sneeze at with a bunch of searching effects, good board control, and a great boss monster with M-Pen. M-Pen being an amazing monster that pulls triple duty as a floodgate, searcher, and a beater. But he's not the one that got the fancy summon animation. Instead, that went to Snowl. Now for one reason, Snowl Edmonds? Screw it. Snow's not the worst. Their ability to normal summon 3 times that turn is spiffy. They give all your monsters piercing damage, and at any point during your opponent's turn can banish a card from your hand to have all your opponent's special summon monsters go to face down mode. Sounds great. The problem is, well, by the time you're able to bring out Snow, you've probably used up all the effects of your other Flu monsters, effectively making this another way of getting a tribute summonable card and a face down turning effect that can already be done by Dreaming Town, which isn't limited to special summon monsters. It just feels a bit redundant when everything it can do is done better by the rest of the deck, which does everything it can do better, making it redundant. I don't think people give Raid Raptors their proper due. They're really versatile, capable of OTKing, control, disruption, and more, and yet are unfairly slept on, especially in comparison to their often aimless cousins, the Phantom Knights. One of the coolest things about them though is the fact they slowly upgrade themselves into more and more powerful monsters. After the already amazing Ultimate Falcon who can prevent your opponent from activating any effects while being immune to card effects himself, what could the final monster be? What is that?
Looks like a pink nightmare.
Ignoring the questionable design, Final Fortress Falcon just plain pales in comparison to Ultimate Falcon. It has the same unaffected by other card effects power as Ultimate, but needs material for it to work, unlike Ultimate. Its other effect makes it so you can return all your banished Raid Raptors to the graveyard, and up to twice per turn it can attack again if it destroys a monster by battle, by banishing an Xyz monster. And I get that it's meant to be a final push, but come on. Ultimate Falcon did that just fine and better. Plus with how Raid Raptors swarm the field anyways, it just feels like a waste. I think it's really telling that Konami gave Ultimate the summon animation while leaving this guy with nothing, despite being the cover card of their secret pack. People use the budget True Draco deck so much that sometimes I feel as though people ignore a lot of the higher level monsters. Fair enough, I guess, especially given a lot of the higher level monsters are banned, like the True King of all Calamities,
Bang!
Masterpiece,
Bang!
but at least we still have Metaltron 12, right? Metaltron requires 3 tributes, and like the other True Draco cards, you can use spell and traps for it, which is pretty neat. And it's unaffected by effects from the card effects you use to summon it, which is actually pretty cool. But it's the other effect that puts it on here. If the card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can special summon 1 Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz monster that's Earth, Water, Wind, or Fire from your extra deck, essentially making it a glorified version of Waking the Dragon. Except Waking the Dragon has no limitations for what you can bring out, can use the main deck, and doesn't require 3 sacrifices. For such a big cost, it feels backwards to want to destroy this thing, especially when one of his effects prevents it from being destroyed by certain card effects. What a completely backwards card. Alright, this is Metaphys, an archetype that relies on the cards being banished to utilize their effects. Not my favorite, but can provide some good support to other decks, and they do have some heavy hitter monsters. Impressive for a relatively budget archetype. So let's make the boss monster run against that. Metaphys Executor relies on you banishing 5 Metaphys cards from your graveyard. Already a pretty steep cost, but even if you do pay the price, you're left with a monster that admittedly can't be destroyed or banished by card effects, but can still be sent back from the hand, with stats that don't back up the cost. Oh, and the effects? Well, once per turn, if your opponent controls more cards than you, you can revive a banished Metaphys monster, and it gets banished during the end phase of your next turn. This thing is a basic recovery monster. I know the idea is to use them so you can use all the banished cards as effects. There are plenty of cards that can banish cards in your graveyard without the steep cost. A boss monster shouldn't be the equivalent of Soul Release, a card from 1999. When Bee Troopers first came out, they were a welcome addition to the game. Finally, insects had an actually playable archetype. They're focused on link summoning with amazing synergy with other insect staples, providing for some insane combos and aggression. The first wave brought some great support and an impressive boss monster with Invincible Atlas. Surely we could go even farther than him, right? Well, for this awesome link-focused deck, Konami decided to add a fusion. Absolute Hercules comes from the unfortunate pattern of Konami just giving a random fusion monster for a deck that really didn't need it. Trickstars, Borreload, Burning Abyss, and yes, Bee Troopers. They even made a custom fusion card to use for other insect fusion monsters, of which there is only one other in the game and it's completely useless. But ignoring that, it has an insane cost of 4 insect monsters for said fusion, which is quite a lot for any deck, let alone Bee Troopers. But the effect must be worth it, right? Well, after it's summoned, it's unaffected by other card effects until the end of your next turn, which is actually pretty cool. And it can revive an insect monster with 3000 attack or less at the end of the battle phase. You know, after where you'd probably need it most. It's a bizarre choice and feels like a downgrade from Invincible Atlas, which already did a lot of these effects already and even better in some regard. But at least thanks to Atlas being a link, it's a lot easier to bring out. This is just such a bizarre choice. I just hope Bee Troopers can recover from something like this. I find it really funny how the Sacred Beasts as a deck is a lot more consistent compared to their cousins, the Egyptian gods. Over the years, they've gotten a lot of support, making using a deck comprised of almost nothing but boss monsters surprisingly usable. But it wasn't always like this. Back in the day, they were a bigger pain to bring out, and Konami's answer to fix the problem? Introduce an even harder to bring out boss monster. Armatile the Chaos Phantasm can only be summoned by banishing all 3 of your Sacred Beast monsters from the field. Already a pretty tricky task, so what do you get in return? Well, it can't be destroyed by battle. Card effects are fair game though, and it gains 10,000 attack points during your turn only, meaning that this thing is a sitting duck during your opponent's turn. Now I put him lower on the list because he was introduced in the GX era, so they were still working out a lot of the kinks of boss monsters. And later on they introduced a monster that can cheat him out while also banishing your opponent's field, which is nice, but this thing is still not worth bringing out. If you really want to get a 10,000 attack point monster really badly like that, just play Utopia. I don't know if this one even counts for the archetype. After all, it's not a Blackwing monster, it's a Black-Winged monster. Big difference. Blackwings are a great deck for swarming the field and doing some crazy damage and control, and so heavily supported by Konami that they got more cards for them than the actual main character's deck of 5Ds. But this one clashes with the rest of the deck, with the big effect being that if you would take damage by a card effect, you could put a counter on Blackwing Dragon instead, and it loses 700 attack points. Once per turn, you can remove all the counters on the card, target a monster your opponent controls, and they lose 700 attack for each counter, and take damage equal to the attack lost by the effect. The problem is that Blackwings don't really have a lot of effects that specifically do damage to you, so this feels rather useless. And again, it's not a Blackwing monster, it's a Black-Winged monster, meaning it doesn't work with card effects for Blackwings. What a joke! Konami has made retrained versions of this card, and while they're improved, they don't make this card any better. Why would you run this card when you could run Blackwell's Dragon instead? Better effect, better synergy, and he's used by Akiza, Yu-Gi-Oh's resident CBT expert. Necros don't get a whole lot of love, but they still aren't anything to mess with, being a ritual deck capable of supporting other really good ritual archetypes, along with themselves. So you'd think they'd have a great boss monster of their own, right? Nope, we got Necros of Sophia. Necros of Sophia already has a steep cost by requiring its summon to use 3 different monsters you control with 3 different types. Already an insane cost, and its big effect after it's brought out is that it banishes all other cards on the field and graveyards, and then you can't summon any other monsters after you activate that effect. There are so many better field or graveyard nukes in the game out there, and they don't have the insane cost that this lady does. Oh, but don't worry, it's also a hand trap. Yep, a boss monster that's also a hand trap. During either player's main phase 1, you can discard it and a Necros spell card, and your opponent can't special summon from the extra deck during that turn. Oh wait, I'm sorry. I meant phase. So if you're up against Despia, they just gotta go to main phase 2 and they can bring out their big combo while you're left with a -2 card advantage. Yes, you could use this on turn 1 I suppose, and there are some other cards that might help with this. But this is still a pretty hilariously empty effect, especially compared to other cards that either last a whole turn or while they're on the field. Drytrons couldn't rescue rituals quicker. Speaking of... For a while, Drytrons were one of the most powerful decks you could build in Yu-Gi-Oh! And for good reason. They were extremely versatile, being great as support for other ritual decks as well as their own. Didn't matter if it was Herald, Megaliths, or even Blue Eyes. They were a great addition and brought out the best in rituals. Though there's one deck nobody was using them with, Ursarctic. So why the hell did Konami make a monster for that? Ultimate Flagship Metaltron is another pointless fusion for a deck that didn't need a fusion, let alone 2 different decks. And it also needs a specific spell card to be summoned with Ursarctic Drytron, a card that requires you to banish the field spells of Ursarctic and Drytron, meaning that one of the field spells is potentially a dead card if you don't use the other archetype. And what is its grand effect? When you special summon an effect monster, once per turn you can add a Ursarctic or Drytron monster to your hand, and add a banished Ursarctic or Drytron to your hand. Ignoring the fact that Drytrons already have 3 searchers that are way easier to utilize, all of that junk in your deck and a wasted extra deck slot for just a searcher is pretty weak. And the recover of banished Drytron can already be done with Beta Rustodon. Sadly, this kind of effect might have been good for Ursarctic, but the problem is, Ursarctic is such a terrible archetype. To the point where a card that can draw 7 cards isn't banned solely because they're so useless. They are grossly underpowered, wasteful, and they certainly don't go with Drytrons. I know Konami has done plenty of cards that pull double duty for other archetypes, and lately that's been very successful with Fallen of Albaz, Despia, and Sword Soul, and like those, the reason this exists is because of the lore, as they're both a range of monsters based on constellations. But that doesn't mean they should go together. Tell you what, my next deck is going to be an Elemental Hero Neos deck and a Silent Magician deck, because they both got them hips! When thinking about what to put for number 1, I had to think hard. A lot of these cards were unnecessary, underpowered, or just plain bad. I wanted one that was actively rage-inducing, and I found just the one. And it's within Heroes. Heroes is one of the most supported, if not the most supported deck in the game, with almost every kind of card you can imagine being inside. Floodgates, Disruption, OTK, Recovery, Board Wipes, Searchers, and whatever the hell Mudball Man is. You name it, they have it. Except for one thing, infamously. Negators. Heroes are exceptionally vulnerable, with no cards offering any kind of protection. And no, DPE does not count. When you play them and it's not your turn, you're often at the mercy of whatever your opponent has. But there was a Negator card made to help them. One that nobody, I repeat, nobody plays. Contrast Hero Chaos. Contrast Hero Chaos isn't like the other cards on the list. The stats, A-okay. And the effect is exactly what Heroes were lacking. On top of being treated as both a light and dark monster, good god, I'd love to see how Gozen Max works on this. Once per turn during either player's turn, you can target a face-up card and negate the abilities until the end of that turn. Exactly what was lacking in Heroes. Perfection! So what's needed to bring it out? 2 masked hero monsters. Are you f***ing kidding me? To quickly explain why this is stupid, masked heroes are a subset of heroes that can only be summoned via the Change series of spell cards, which exchanges a hero monster on your field with a masked hero of the same attribute from your extra deck. Problem there is the Change cards can only be reliably searched by Shadow Mist when she's special summoned. And another problem is that there are only 3 which are heavily utilized. Acid, Blast, and Darklaw. While Acid's effect to destroy all spells and traps on your opponent's field is a one and done, and Blast isn't exactly the best in the world, Darklaw is one you want to keep out. Darklaw makes it so that any card sent to your opponent's graveyard is banished instead. And if they add a card to their hand outside of their draw phase, they can banish one random card in their hand. He's someone you want to keep out, and given that Shadow Mist is a dark type, he's logically going to be the one you get to first. Hero players do often try to get 2 of him out, as having the ability to make your opponent have a -1 card advantage and banishment is oftentimes a big game changer. So even if you were to bring out Contrast Hero via the most reliable way, you'd be putting yourself at a huge disadvantage. And again, given how Mass Change works, You're basically giving up 4 monsters to bring this out, 2 of which can't be brought back. Contrast Hero is a number 1 not only because the cost is almost impossible, but also because it feels like a taunt.
Oh, you want some protection for your heroes? Here you go. Just give us some of your best monsters.
What a joke. Anyhow, that's my list. There are plenty of others, but those are the most egregious ones. What are some pretty awful boss monsters you know? Let me know in the comments, please subscribe, and go try out Despia. Seriously, now there's a deck with a ton of great boss monsters.